Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, July 31st, 2025. I want to share with you part of a lecture that I heard earlier this year from Rabbi JJ Schacter. It was in November 1942 that Jews in Israel finally heard firsthand the scope of the unfolding Holocaust. They had heard reports, but firsthand accounts, November 1942. And so in November 1942, when they heard this news, of course, everybody was distraught. And at that time, the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel was Rabbi Herzog. And Rabbi Herzog had an idea, and he went to one of the great Torah scholars at that time, Rabbi Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik. And he went to him to ask if he would agree that there should be a day of mourning, Yom Avel, a day of mourning. I want to point out, he did not ask for a fast day, but he asked for a day of mourning in memory of the Kedoshim of the Holocaust up until that point. Rabbi Soloveitchik said, no. He said, She'asa lahosef al yemei ha'avel. It is not permitted to add days of mourning to the calendar. So Rabbi Herzog asked him, what is the source for that? And Rabbi Soloveitchik said the source is one of the keynotes that we say on Tisha B'Av. So the keynotes are the elaborate poems of lamentation. They were written by different people over several centuries, and they are recited on Tisha B'Av morning at the end of the chakras, the end of the morning service. And this is one of the main ways that we give expression to the enormity of the tragedy of the destruction of the temple. And in addition to that, there are several of them that discuss other topics, other tragedies. And one of them was written by Rabbi Kalonimus ben Yehuda of Speyer. And he wrote a kina, one of these poems, to commemorate and memorialize the Crusades. The Crusades started in 1096, and they devastated Jewish communities in France and Germany. There were about 3,000 Jews who were murdered in the total of the Crusades. And it was particularly cruel and barbaric, and it was a big tragedy. It is a big tragedy. And so one of the keynotes was written by him talking about this tragedy. Now, the tragedy did not happen on Tisha B'Av, but it goes like this. I'll just quote a little bit of it. Mi yitain roshi mayim ve'eni makar nozlai. If my head were water and my eyes a fountain of tears, ve'evka kol yemosai v'leilai. I would cry all of my days and nights. Al chalale tape v'ololai v'yisise kaholai. For the corpses, the dead bodies of my babies and infants and the aged of my community. Ve'atem anu oivoi. And I ask you to respond, woe, woe is to us. U'b'cho becherav v'herev. And weep with me, much weeping. Al Beis Yisrael v'alal Hashem. For the house of Israel and the people of God, ki naflu b'charev, who fell by sword. And it goes on, and he mentions the cities that it took place in. He mentions the dates on the Jewish calendar that it happened. And then there's a stanza that goes like this. Simuna al levavchem mispaid mar lekashra. Take this to heart and compose a bitter eulogy. Ki shkula harigasem lias abel ulis afra k'streifas beis elokenu ha'ulam v'abira. The tragedy of the murder of these innocent Jews during the Crusades is equivalent in impact to the destruction of the temple. However, it is not proper to add a day of mourning, not to make it earlier, not to make it later, but rather it should be on Tisha B'Av. So the tragedy is included of the tragedy on Tisha B'Av. Ki ein lahosef. We should not add more days of mourning and sadness and fasting. So we put it in together with Tisha B'Av, even though it happened on different days of the calendar. So Rabbi Soloveitchik said that he says explicitly, don't add fast days, don't add days of mourning. And if that was true for the Crusades, it's also true for the Holocaust. And the correct thing is that the Holocaust should be memorialized on Tisha B'Av. But don't add a separate day just for the Holocaust. Likewise, the same reasoning was later used to oppose Yom HaShoah. When Yom HaShoah was proposed, we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, Holocaust Memorial Day, there are those who use this same reasoning that he says, Ein lahosif, you shouldn't add days. So you should not add a day. Rather, you should include it in Tisha B'Av and only on Tisha B'Av. Similarly, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was asked, why is it that within the religious world that there is not a day designated to fast in memory of the victims of the Holocaust? And he said the same thing. Hine bekinos, Shekol Yisrael Omrim b'Tisha B'Av. In the kinos that all of Israel says on Tisha B'Av, Meforish Shama, Shlo Tiknu Yom Yuchel L'Tainis L'Bechia. We don't establish any more days. Rather, it should be included in Tisha B'Av and only on Tisha B'Av. And he also was opposed to Yom HaShoah for the same reason. You should not establish any new fast days. Now, There are two obvious questions on this opinion. Number one, since when is a poet a source of Jewish law? He's writing a poem. It's not the Shulchan Aruch, it's not the Code of Jewish Law, it's not in the Talmud. He says you shouldn't do it. I say you should do it. We don't use poetry to decide matters of Jewish law. And if we would, what is his source? If you want to posit a certain rule in rabbinic law, you have to have a source. You can't just make it up and put it in a poem. What's the source? There is no source. And the truth is, his words also are not exactly clear, because he says, Ein lahosef, we do not add. He doesn't say osur lahosef, it's prohibited to add. If he would say prohibited, that seems to imply that there's a law not to do it. Osur means it's not our practice. Maybe it's not your practice, maybe it's my practice. That's question number one. Question number two is much more difficult, because we know for a fact that Jews did add fast days commemorating various tragedies throughout our history. Many, many fast days. It's just a fact of history. For example, there was an attack against the Jews in the Middle Ages, and Rabbeinu Tam, one of the great sources of Jewish law, decreed a fast day on the 20th day of Sivan. That's when this terrible attack took place, the 20th day of Sivan. He established a fast day to be observed every year. Centuries later, the Khmelnytsky pogroms that occurred in 1648. And again, centuries later, the 20th of Sivan was designated as a fast day for the victims of those pogroms. They were very terrible pogroms. And many, many others. Dozens of fast days that were established. So how can these great authorities say that in fact the rule is we do not, when we know we do? And certainly the Holocaust is not less than any of those. It's much more. It's probably in a category all its own. Okay, well, the Orthodox world largely does include a kina for the Holocaust on Tisha B'Av. So most, not every Orthodox synagogue, but many Orthodox synagogues include one kina. At ADATH, we do it at night. Some people do it during the day in memory of the Holocaust. I must tell you, in my humble opinion, and I'm not anyone to disagree with these great rabbis, but in my humble opinion, I worry that that one kina on Tisha B'Av is not a sufficient memorial for the Holocaust. You know, the thing is, the more things you add, the less focus there is on each one. And to say that the only public recognition and memorial to the Holocaust is that one poem we say on Tisha B'Av, I don't think that is, I don't think that's going to do it. Now, the fact is that much of the Haredi world follows this today. They may say Akina on Tisha B'Av, but in general, they do not observe Yom HaShoah. And I just have to say, from my point of view, it seems like there is a lack in that world of any kind of public commemoration of the Holocaust. Now, perhaps they say that they make it up in other ways. Perhaps they say it's transmitted at home, it's transmitted in the school. I don't see it, but I'm outside of it. So it could be that I'm missing it. But I worry about that. If that would be the only mention of the Holocaust in public, I would worry about that. Okay. In 1959, the state of Israel passed a law, Chok Yom HaZikaron L'Shoah U'Legvura, a day of remembrance of the Holocaust and the uprisings, the strengths. You may know that the date was chosen to come close to the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. That in itself is a controversial thing. We'll leave that to the side for now. But the law in Israel, passed in 1959, stated that Chav Zayin Nisan, the 27th day of Nisan, that is the day that we observe Yom HaShoah, should be set aside every year for a remembrance of the Holocaust and remembering the actions of those who rose up against the Nazis, like the Warsaw Uprising and others. And they legislated that on that day, there should be 2 minutes of silence. And that's done even today by means of a siren across all of Israel, where all work stops, all movement stops, everyone stands in their place. And on that day, there should be gatherings. Gatherings in the army, gatherings in educational places. As we see today, we have gatherings all over here in Montreal, more than one. One community gathering, and there are others. So that was established in 1959. Over the years, Yom HaShoah has taken hold over a large segment of the Jewish world. I would say all of the modern Orthodox world certainly participates, as we do. But in large part, the Haredi world does not participate, based on the rulings of Rabbi Feinstein and Rabbi Soloveitchik and others. Okay. But let's go back to these scholars and the question we asked before. How can they base their decision on a line in one of the keynotes in the face of incontrovertible evidence, historical record of many fast days that were proclaimed and observed outside of Tisha B'Av? There's several answers. I want to share a very bold approach from Rabbi JJ Schacter. Now, I want to preface this by saying that Rabbi Schacter is my teacher. I hold him in the highest regard. I have learned so much from him and hope to continue to do so. I think this approach is intriguing, although, again, with humility, I'm not certain that I completely agree with it, but I think it deserves consideration. But it's very bold. Rabbi Schacter said, the reason these rabbis say you cannot separate the Holocaust from Tisha B'Av is because if you establish a different day, you are making this statement that this day, the Holocaust, this event, the Holocaust, breaks the mold of Tisha B'Av. The mold of Tisha B'Av, the theme of Tisha B'Av, is expressed in the prayer that we say in our Yom Tov davening, because of our sins, we were exiled from our land. And that is repeated over and over and over again in the book of Eicha, in the Kinos. The Jewish people sinned, and the punishment was the destruction of the temple. If you're going to establish a different day to memorialize the Holocaust, what you're saying is the Holocaust does not fit in to that model. Welcome, welcome. And there's some cookies. Please help yourself. It does not fit into that model. And if it does not fit into that model, what model does it fit into? Because then we will have to ask ourselves a question that has no answer. How is it possible that 6 million Jews were murdered, that 1.5 million children were murdered? What possible sin could they have committed? What possible sin could be responsible for the Holocaust? If you include it in Tisha B'Av, then it gets submerged into Tisha B'Av. But if you set it aside as a separate day, you're going to look at each other, you're going to ask the question, and we do ask the question. And Rabbi Schacter suggests that the reason these rabbis opposed a separate day for the Holocaust is because they felt that they were risking the emunah of their communities. They were risking their faith in God. If people are to focus on that question, and we know, of course, many people lost their faith in God as a result of the Holocaust. Many people who were in the Holocaust and survived, and many people after, to this day, refused to believe in God that could allow the Holocaust. These scholars felt that it was more important to hold on to the faith of the people in their community rather than establishing a separate day. I must tell you that I think it's a fascinating approach. I find it difficult to believe. But I also have to say, I do not know of a better answer to this question. In any event, as I said, we do incorporate other tragedies into Tisha B'Av, the Crusades, the burning of the Talmud in Paris, and others, including the Holocaust. But as I said before, the danger is the more you add, the less attention each one receives. And I would assert, certainly for us today in our community, the Holocaust needs its own day, a time to focus on it exclusively, because however we understand it or do not understand it, it is certainly in a category on its own. I want to share with you a story. It relates somewhat to the Holocaust, but it also connects to Israel in a way that I think we should be thinking about during Tisha B'Av this year and every year. So the story goes like this. A few years ago, my wife and I were in Israel, visiting in Israel, and we had the great pleasure that at the same time, one of our children and two of our grandchildren were also in Israel. And in general, they were doing their thing, we were doing our thing. But one day we had our grandson with us for the day. Great day. and we took our grandson to visit the Ayalon Institute in Rehovot. Now, you may know about this. You may have been there yourself. If you have not been there, please put it on your list. It is a must-see attraction in Israel. Rehovot is a city south of Tel Aviv. And the Ayalon Institute is an incredible, incredible story. And the story goes like this, that in 1945, Jews were in Israel, and they had to start fighting. And especially the war broke out in 1948. Now, they were able to get some weapons secretly from other places, but they did not have bullets. So they came up with a plan, but remember, the British were still in charge, and the British were watching very, very closely. They came up with a brilliant plan. There was a kibbutz just outside of what is now Rehovot. And what they did is they dug a basement under this kibbutz. They secretly brought machinery from outside of Israel in order to make bullets. But the point was, nobody could find out. It had to be a complete secret. So they located this place very close to a train line so that when they needed to make noise, they could time it when the train was passing by so people wouldn't hear what was going on underground. And the kibbutz on top operated like a regular kibbutz. And most of the people in the kibbutz, the Jews, the Israelis, had no idea it was a complete secret. There were 45 members of this group, young people, and they had a way where they hid the entranceway, and during the lunch hour, they would go, no one would see them, and they would go underground, and they would make these bullets. They later became known as the giraffes, because at the Tel Aviv Zoo, the way that you move a giraffe is to make sure that the giraffe does not look down. So the people in the kibbutz, they had to make sure they did not look down. So everything was secret. In fact, there was a British military installation on the hill next to the kibbutz. And what they did was they located the entranceway, because of course they had to use a tremendous amount of electricity and no one else could find out. So they located this underneath the laundry. And so they kept the laundry going 24/7. And they offered to the British that they would do their laundry for them. And they offered that they would deliver it at no cost. So they were doing the laundry for the British soldiers, and they had no idea. And again, they made, between 1945 and 1948, they made about 2.25 million bullets. That's 40,000 bullets a day. And they had to test them. You need quality control. It's not enough to make a bullet. You have to make sure that it works. So again, they had to shoot one, but they had to time it at the moment that the train was passing. They would shoot a bullet to make sure it was working. It's an amazing thing, and you can go there now and you tour it. And you see the kibbutz, it's restored the way it looked then, and then you can go down the steps and you see where they worked, and it was very hard work. It was very hot. There was no air conditioning. It was very difficult and dangerous work because they're in an enclosed place. There's all kinds of gunpowder. And also the fact that these workers were underground so long, their skin was pale. So they were worried that they would be detected by the rest of the people who had nice suntans. So they had a tanning machine. They had a machine that they would sit under, a UV lamp, to tan their skin so that they would look like everybody else. And every time they left, they would have an inspection of each other to make sure there was no debris, no little pieces of metal in their hair or on their clothes. And it worked. And they supplied the bullets to the Palmach, and it played a role in the establishment of Israel. So I'm telling you, it's an incredible visit. I urge you to do it if you haven't done it. Okay, that's the background. That's the introduction. That's the introduction. So we took our grandson. We had been a couple of times before, but we took our grandson. We had a great visit. We had a great guide that explained everything. And then at the end of the tour, when we came to the end, our guide told us a story. And this is the story I want to tell you. She told us that in 1994, a woman visited with a group. She came downstairs. She saw what had been going on there, and she fainted. No one knew why. She went home. No one knew who she was. No one knew what had happened. A few weeks later, they received a letter from a woman named Penina. That was her name. And she told the following story. Penina is an elderly woman. In World War II, she was a young girl, and she was taken to a secret underground lager camp in Germany, making bullets for the Nazis. And they worked under terrible conditions of hunger and isolation and danger. In 1945, the Americans started bombing. And the Nazi guards knew that a hit on this underground factory would be a catastrophe. So the guards ran away. But before they ran away, they took 200 Jewish girls who were working there, and they locked them in. And they said to them, because they were certain that they would be killed, and they said to them, the last thing they said as they locked them in, just listen to this cruelty. They said to them, and remember, these girls were isolated. They said to them, "You are the last Jews on earth. No other Jews survived. There's no one coming to save you. And when you are killed, as you certainly will be killed, that will be the end of the Jewish race." The Americans did not bomb the factory. The Americans actually saved these girls, and Penina settled in Israel. In 1994, Penina visited Ayalon, and she saw this underground factory, and she realized for the first time that at the same time that she was secretly making bullets for the Nazis, certainly used to kill Jews, these heroic young people, the Israelis, about her age, they were secretly making bullets in Rehovot to protect Jews and to help create the state of Israel. In other words, they were doing virtually the same job that she was doing, but for a very, very different reason. And she finally realized fully that when she was locked in that factory with 200 other girls, they were not alone. There were Jews at that moment in Israel helping to create the state of Israel and to welcome her and others as survivors. And that's why when she saw this underground factory, she fainted at the emotion of seeing the familiar machinery that she had used, but this time it was being used not against her, but for her. I think this is a story that perfectly encapsulates the drama and the miracle of modern Israeli history. Okay. One last story. In 1984, some of us will remember, there was Operation Moses. And that was a dramatic operation by Israel to airlift 25,000 Ethiopian Jews from Ethiopia to Israel. Now, that was the first of many, but that was really the first contact that Israelis had with Ethiopian Jews in any kind of numbers. For many, many Israelis, and certainly for the Ethiopians, it was their first contact with a Jewish community. Because remember, the Ethiopian Jewish community had been isolated from the rest of the world for 2,000 years. I heard this story from Rabbi Spiro. The story is about a woman in Israel, and she was looking for a job, and she saw a job to teach Hebrew to recently arrived Ethiopian immigrants. And she had heard about Operation Moses. She didn't know so much about it. And the Israeli government had set up absorption centers in order to acclimate the Ethiopian Jews into Israeli society, because it was a totally alien culture. They'd never been exposed to such a thing. And one of the things they wanted to teach them is Hebrew. So they needed Hebrew teachers. So Yael was a good teacher, and she applied for the job, and she got the job. First day of class, she didn't really know what to expect. She had never met an Ethiopian Jew in her life. And she sees these people now in Israel, Jewish people, with every different skin color and every different kind of clothing, and men and women and children. And this is part of the Jewish people, the mosaic of the Jewish people. She was amazed. So she starts the lesson. She holds up a letter Aleph. She says, this is the letter Aleph. It's the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And here are some words that start with the letter Aleph. Abba, Ima, Aviron, airplane, because they had come on an airplane. Okay. And the students, of course, were very interesting. And she flipped through pictures with the letter Aleph, with pictures that had in the name the letter Aleph, to show them, and they're very interesting. And then she gets to the letter Bet. She holds up a bet. A word that starts with Bet is bayit, a house. Another word that starts with bet is Bet HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. When she said Bet HaMikdash, the students looked puzzled. And she didn't understand. What did I say? So a little boy, 8 or 9 years old, raises his hand and asks the question, have you ever seen it? The Beit HaMikdash? Have you seen it? And Yael says, of course not. And a few minutes later, the boy says, well, why not? Why haven't you seen it? And she said, well, because it's not there anymore. And the boy says to her, what happened to it? And she said it was nearly 2,000 years ago. The Romans destroyed it. It doesn't exist. And the boy shouted at her, liar, you're a liar. And the boy ran out of the room. She had no idea. She didn't make any sense to her. Class ended. She got ready to leave. She gathered her things. She's met at the door by the boy and his parents and his aunts and uncles and cousins and sisters and brothers. The whole family is there. And the father says to this teacher, why did you lie to our son? And she says, I didn't lie to him. I'm sorry. He became so upset. All I said was that the Romans destroyed the Beit HaMikdash about 2,000 years ago. And the father said, why are you lying again? Again, you're lying. And Yael said, I'm not lying. I promise you, it's true. 2,000 years ago, the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed by the Romans. And as soon as she said these words, tears began to stream down the cheeks of these people. The pain and the horror that the Beit HaMikdash had been destroyed. And at that moment, Yael had a realization that she never thought that she would encounter. They never knew that the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. As far as they knew, it was still there. And they were hearing at this moment for the first time of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. And they sat on the ground and they tore their clothes. And Yael thought to herself, what a merit it is to see a person who truly, truly feels the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash as if they've heard it for the first time. Okay, we're used to it. But this is an important story to remember on Tisha B'Av, that we should try somehow at least to try to reach, at least to think about what that family went through, as if it's the first time we hear this terrible news. My friends, I wish you a good evening and a good Shabbos. I hope for you that Tisha B'Av will be meaningful and inspiring. And most of all, I hope that this will be the last Tisha B'Av that we observe as a fast day. And in the future, it will be transformed to a day of joy and redemption.